Netherwood Park Children's Program, Sunday, June 14th, take one.
Hey guys, I'm Nikki, and I miss you. I really miss you. Miss Kayla and Miss Stephanie have done an awesome job over the last several weeks of taking us through Joseph's life, and I get to wrap that up for us today. So, this is a timeline of Joseph's life, and Miss Kayla and Miss Stephanie took us through when Joseph was sold as a slave when he was 17 years old, how he rose to power in Potiphar's house, how he ended up in jail, and then interpreted dreams for Pharaoh's butler and baker. And last week, we got right up to Genesis chapter 41, when Joseph interpreted the dreams for Pharaoh and eventually rose to be second in command in Egypt. And that's where we are today. We're in Genesis chapter 41. And we're going to move on from here and see how God used Joseph in the rest of Genesis. So we're in Genesis chapter 1, and in verse 46, it says, Joseph was 30 years old when he began serving Pharaoh, the king of Egypt. He left Pharaoh's palace and traveled all over Egypt. During the 7 years, there was plenty of food. So remember, the dream that Joseph interpreted for Pharaoh is what foresaw that there would be 7 good years, and then there would be 7 years of famine. So we see in verse 46 of chapter 41, Joseph was 30 years old when he began serving Pharaoh, the king of Egypt. He left Pharaoh's palace and traveled all over Egypt. During the 7 years, there was plenty of food. The land produced more than the people needed. Joseph collected all the extra food produced in those 7 years in Egypt, and he stored it up in the cities. In each city, he stored up the food grown in the fields around it. Joseph stored up huge amounts of grain, and there was as much of it as the sand by the sea. There was so much grain, it couldn't be measured. But the 7 years when there was plenty of food in Egypt came to an end. Then the 7 years when there wasn't enough food began, and it happened just as Joseph said that it would. There wasn't enough food in any of the other lands, but in the whole land of Egypt there was food. So among some of the people that were hungry during this time is Joseph's family. They lived in Canaan. Jacob found out that there was grain in Egypt, and he said to his sons, "Why do you keep looking at one another?" He continued, "I've heard there's grain in Egypt. Go down there and buy some for us. Then we will live and not die." So he sends 10 of Joseph's brothers. And remember, Joseph was the youngest of 11 sons, but then Benjamin was born after him. Jacob wants to keep his youngest son Benjamin home with him because he's afraid that something will happen to him, because something has happened to his youngest son before. So he sends his 10 sons to get grain in Egypt. And that brings us here in chapter 42. Verse 6, Joseph was the governor of the land. He was the one who sold grain to all its people. When Joseph's brothers arrived, they bowed down to him with their faces to the ground. As soon as Joseph saw his brothers, he recognized them, but he pretended to be a stranger. And this used to bug me when I'd read it, because I didn't understand how out of 10 brothers, not one of them would look at Joseph and recognize him as having been their brother. But I have something here that I think changed my mind. So what I have is a picture of my husband when he was about 17 years old. And remember, Joseph was about 17 when he left Canaan and was sold as a slave to Egypt. And then he was about 39 at this time. Here's a picture of my husband when he's about 39. And when I look at it, I see some familiar things. I see a freckle I recognize and a look in his eyes. I see a smile. But I wonder if we could imagine this with a change of clothing, maybe some makeup. Who knows what all would have been different in a different setting, out of context. I think we can imagine that maybe Joseph's brothers wouldn't recognize that this second in command over Egypt that was before them was actually the brother that they had sold into slavery 22 years before. So Joseph's 10 brothers are kneeling before him. And he recognizes them, but they don't recognize him. And in that moment, he realizes that his childhood dream has come true. His brothers are bowing before him, and he has an idea to test them. He accuses them of being spies. They insisted they were not spies, but brothers, and told Joseph that one brother was back home with their father, and one brother had died. Joseph said that he would keep one of the brothers in custody until they all returned with their youngest brother, Benjamin. So Simeon is jailed, and the brothers' sacks are filled up with grain for their trip back home. When they returned home, they told Jacob that they had to return with Benjamin. Jacob was very fearful of losing his youngest son, just as he had lost Joseph. But eventually, when they got hungry enough, he agreed. When they returned with Benjamin, Joseph had a large feast prepared for his brothers, and he ordered his steward to fill each man's sack with as much food as he could carry. But he also had the steward secretly put a silver cup in Benjamin's sack. After the brothers began their trip home, Joseph had his steward stop the brothers and accuse them of stealing the cup. The brothers insisted that they did not steal and said that if any brother was found with the cup, he could be put to death. When the cup was found in Benjamin's sack, the brothers were devastated and pleaded with Joseph to spare Benjamin. They said that if they returned home without Benjamin, their father would surely die. Joseph couldn't hide his identity any longer. I'm going to read the rest of this from the Bible, and we're in Genesis chapter 45, verses 3 through 7. Joseph said to his brothers, "I am Joseph. Is my father still alive?" But his brothers weren't able to answer him. They were too afraid. Joseph said to his brothers, "Come close to me." So they did. Then he said, "I am your brother Joseph. I'm the one you sold into Egypt. But don't be upset, and don't be angry with yourselves because you sold me here. God sent me ahead of you to save many lives. For 2 years now there hasn't been enough food in the land, and for the next 5 years people won't be plowing or gathering crops. But God sent me ahead of you to keep some of you alive on earth. He sent me here to save your lives by an act of mighty power." Hey Sam, can you read for us verse 8 of chapter 45?
So then, it wasn't you who sent me here, it was God. He made me like a father to Pharaoh. He made me master of Pharaoh's entire house. God made me ruler of the whole land of Egypt.
So Joseph gives credit where credit's due, right? He says, "I'm not the one who's saving you. It was God who put me here." And he goes on to have the brothers go back and invite Jacob and the entire family to come live there in Egypt. It's over 70 people with all the wives and children. And eventually, in chapter 50 of Genesis, Jacob dies after settling his family in Egypt. But in verse 20 of chapter 50, we get the real meat of the message here, I think. Charlie, can you read verse 20 for us?
You planned to harm me, but God planned it for good. He planned to do what is now being done. He wanted to save many lives.
God had a plan for Joseph's life, and he saw it all the way from the very beginning, all the way to the very end. Joseph trusted God, and God had a plan for his life. And we're going to head outside, and we're going to try to drive this message home just a little bit with a visual. Let's go. So our lesson this week is that just like Joseph, we can trust that God is still with us even in difficult times. So we're going to use this water in this cup to represent a scary time or a difficult time or a trial in our life. And we're going to try to get something in our mind to remind us that we can trust God in all situations. So, Sam, what if I were to turn this cup over on your head? Would that be a good idea?
No.
No.
Terrible idea.
Do you think that Joseph thought it was a good thing when his brothers sold him into slavery? Or when Potiphar wrongly accused him and threw him into prison? No, I don't either. But this week we learned that even though Joseph had really bad things happen to him, God never left him. And he used those bad things for good. God was with him. I'll give you this just in case.
Okay.
And then I'm going to turn this cup of water over on your head.
This is terrifying.
Remember that God is with us no matter how bad things seem, no matter how hard they seem, and no matter how scary they seem. Actually, in Romans 8:28, it says that he'll do in our lives exactly what he did in Joseph's life. It says that he works all things for good for those who love him and are called according to his purpose. Stick around for just a couple more minutes and you can get crafty with Netherwood Park's least crafty person. Let's go. Okay, so we're going to make something that's going to remind us of the lesson this week. And it's very versatile. There isn't very many things that you need. I emailed your parents this verse that you can cut out and poke a little hole in. You need a piece of string. Any kind of string will work, or yarn, or jute. You need something to represent grain in our grain bags. So maybe it's popcorn, or rice, or oatmeal, or cereal, anything to represent grain in our grain bags. And your grain bags can actually be anything too. So maybe it's a paper bag. I have a piece of cheesecloth here that Sam is going to use for his. Or you can use an old sock. I have an old sock that I've got inside out here. I put a rubber band real tight just above the heel. And I'm going to cut the bottom off of it. And when we turn this inside out, we'll have a little grain sack for Charlie. So we'll turn this inside out here, and we've all got grain sacks. But we need a little silver cup to put in our grain sack, right? To remind us of Benjamin and the cup. So a tiny little piece of foil is going to do that for us. And if we take this little piece of foil, we're just going to fold the top down to give us a nice straight line across the top. And then we're going to take this piece of foil and just wrap it around our finger. There you go, Sam. Charlie, wrap that foil around your finger. You want me to help you?
I think I got it.
Okay. And when you're done wrapping it around, you're going to pinch the bottom. Pinch the bottom to give you a little stem. And then we're going to smash anything that's left into the foot. Okay. And we end up with a little silver goblet for us to put inside of our grain sack. All right, so we're going to fill up our grain bags. Charlie, let's fill yours up with some corn kernels, okay? And then toss your little silver chalice in there. Sam, let's do rice in yours. Give you a couple scoops of rice. Throw your silver cup in. And we're going to take this and bind it all up with the jute. We can tie this verse on. Genesis chapter 50, verse 20. You intended to harm me, but God intended it for good. And we'll have a little reminder of the way that God worked in Joseph's life. I miss you guys. We're done with Joseph now. We're going to move on to something new and exciting next week. And we look forward to going through it with you the rest of the summer. Bye.